Do you need a mechanic? She asked it from the doorway of the Iron Shield garage at 9:15 on a November Tuesday, standing in the rain and gripping a toolbox held together with a strip of electrical tape, and the three men inside stopped working at exactly the same moment. She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. She was just standing there in the cold, her dark hair matted flat against her neck, wearing a canvas jacket 2 sizes too large that had someone else's name stitched above the chest pocket. Beneath the left side of her jaw, half hidden by the collar, there was a bruise, wide and purplish and several days old. She held the toolbox against her hip like it was the one thing she was certain about. Patrick Stitch Lafleur was the closest to the door. He was 43 years old, broad-shouldered, with a gray-streaked beard and hands that had been working on engines since he was 17. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he isn't sure he's seeing correctly. "Shop's closed," he said. "I know," she said. "I didn't come as a customer." She said it without an edge, just an explanation. Stitch looked past her into the rain, then back at her. "You lost?" "No." She shifted the toolbox. "I've been a mechanic for 6 years. Small engines, road bikes, custom builds, restorations. I'm good at diagnostics. I work fast and I don't make mistakes twice." She paused. "I heard in town you were short-staffed." Stitch folded his arms. "Where'd you hear that?" "The woman at the gas station on Birch. She mentioned it without me asking." He studied her for a moment. "You got a name?" "Faye Morin." From the back of the garage, a voice, unhurried, carrying the particular weight of a man who didn't need to raise it to be heard. "Stitch, bring her in." Cole Brandt was 54 years old and had been running the Iron Shield MC chapter in Hartwell for 19 years. He had a gray beard trimmed close, a scar along his left forearm from a welding accident in 1998, and the specific quality of stillness that comes to men who have spent a long time watching situations carefully before deciding how to respond. He was the president of a club that had a complicated reputation in town, feared by some, misunderstood by most, and respected in ways that never quite made it into polite conversation. They ran the garage legitimately. They employed 6 men, paid their taxes, repaired half the bikes in Hartwell County. They also didn't answer to anyone they hadn't chosen to answer to, which was itself a kind of language in a small town. Cole crossed the garage floor and looked at Faye Morin for a long moment without hurrying the assessment. He took in the toolbox, old Snap-on, cared for despite the tape holding the latch. He took in the canvas jacket, the muddy boots, the way she held her chin level, and he took in the bruise. "You alone?" he asked. "Yes." "In some kind of trouble?" A brief pause. "I'm looking for work. That's the trouble I'm in." He didn't push it. "How'd you end up at our door specifically?" "I went to 3 other shops today. 2 of them looked at me and said they weren't hiring before I finished the sentence. The third one offered me work, but the conditions weren't something I was willing to accept." She said it flatly, so I kept walking. The garage was quiet enough that the rain on the steel roof was audible. Rudy Case, the senior mechanic, was standing near the back bench with his arms crossed. Lorne Samuels, who handled club security and had the exact expression of a man running a continuous mental risk calculation, was watching from the side. "What's your specialty?" Cole asked. "Diagnostic primarily. I can listen to an engine and tell you what's wrong before I open the casing." She looked past him toward the bikes on the lifts. "That dyna on the second lift is running hot on the left cylinder. You can see the heat discoloration on the header. It's probably the intake gasket, but you'll want to check the carb needle position too. Someone's been compensating for the lean run by overfueling, and now the plug's fouled." Nobody moved. Rudy made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Cole looked at the dyna, then back at her. "You get that from standing in the doorway?" "You had the light on it. The discoloration shows." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You eaten?" She opened her mouth and stopped herself. "No," she said, "not since this morning." "Rudy, get her something." He looked at Faye. "I'm not making any decisions tonight about work. Tonight you need to be dry and you need to eat. We'll talk in the morning." She looked at him with an expression he recognized. Not suspicion exactly. More like someone who has learned that offers of basic kindness usually have a cost attached, and who is trying to determine what this one costs. "Why?" she asked, genuinely. "Because you walked here in the rain to ask for honest work," he said. "And because whoever put that bruise on your jaw, tonight isn't the night to send you back out there." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Okay." She set the toolbox down next to the workbench and sat. She slept that night on a cot in the back storage room, which smelled of machine oil and rubber and had a deadbolt on the inside that she used. She was asleep within minutes. She had not slept that solidly in 3 weeks. By 6 in the morning, she was already in the main bay. Rudy arrived at 6:30 to find the parts room reorganized. Every bin relabeled in a clean, consistent hand, fasteners separated by grade and pitch. The filter inventory cross-referenced against the open work orders on the whiteboard, with 2 shortages circled in red marker and the part numbers written beside them. He stood in the doorway for a full 30 seconds. Then he went and knocked on Cole's office door. She worked. That was the simplest way to describe the first 2 weeks. Cole told her she was on trial and paid her accordingly. She accepted both conditions without comment and went to work. She had the mechanic's particular relationship with machinery, not just technical, but almost conversational. She listened to engines the way some people listen to music, with a focused attention that caught things others missed. The dyno was right, intake gasket and fouled plug. Both replaced before noon on her first full day, documented on the work order in handwriting so precise it looked typeset. By the end of the first week, the men in the garage had shifted in the way men shift when they've stopped expecting someone to fail. Stitch started explaining jobs to her as they worked, the way you talk to someone who is genuinely paying attention. Rudy began asking her opinion on diagnostic calls, at first with the tone of a man testing a theory, and then without that tone. Lawrence Samuels watched her constantly through those first days, carefully, impartially, the way he watched everyone, but he was fair about it. She ate whatever was in the backroom fridge, slept on the cot, and by the end of the second week had quietly fixed 3 recurring issues in the shop's workflow: the parts ordering system, the job scheduling board, and a billing error that had been quietly overcharging one of their regulars for months. She didn't announce any of it. She just did it and left a note. Cole found the billing note on a Wednesday afternoon and came to find her in the bay, where she was neck-deep in a transmission rebuild. "You found this going back 6 months," he said. "7, she said without looking up. "The rate discrepancy is in every invoice since last April. Whoever changed the labor rate entry in the system set it at a different value for that customer type. Small difference per job, but it compounds. How do you know it's a system entry and not deliberate? Because it affects all 3 customers in that billing category equally. If it were deliberate, it would be selective." Cole looked at her for a moment. "Write the correction letters, I'll sign them." He was almost out of the bay when he stopped. "You doing all right in that back room?" "Yes," she said. He nodded and left. She watched him go, and something behind her sternum loosened a thread. She had been careful in the way that people are careful when they have spent a long time learning to be. She sat with her back to the wall when there was a choice. She knew where the exits were. She still flinched when something moved fast at the edge of her vision, though she'd gotten good at making the flinch invisible. Cole noticed. He said nothing about it, but he noticed. It was Stitch who mentioned the dark blue SUV first. He'd seen it twice on the street outside, not parked directly in front, but far enough down the block to have a sight line to the garage entrance. Same vehicle, different times. He mentioned it to Cole without making it a crisis. 3 days later, Lorne came back from a parts run with more. A man had been at the Hartwell diner asking the counter staff whether they'd seen a young woman, dark hair, early to mid-20s, recently arrived. He hadn't given her name or his own. He described her precisely enough that the staff knew exactly who he meant. Ontario plates on the SUV. Cole went to find Faye. She was in the parts room updating the inventory ledger. She looked up when he came in, and something in his face made her set the pen down very slowly. "Someone's been asking about you in town," Cole said. She didn't flinch. "What did they say?" "Described you well enough, Ontario plates." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not going to pretend I'm surprised." "No," he said. "I didn't think you would be." He pulled a stool over and sat. "I need to know what I'm dealing with before it shows up at my door in a way I can't manage. Not because I'm going to use it against you, because the opposite." She looked at him for a long time, and then she told him. Her name wasn't Faye Morin, not legally. She had been born Faye Alcott, daughter of Diane Morin and stepdaughter of Graham Alcott, who was a provincial constituency director with a reputation for community investment and the particular kind of charm that photographed well and read beautifully in endorsement letters. He sat on 3 boards. He had a foundation. He had a name that opened doors. Diane had married Graham when Faye was 12. For the first year, it had seemed stable. Graham was organized, financially careful, publicly generous. And then gradually, the doors inside the house began to close. Faye described it the way people describe things they have rehearsed in their own heads for years, with the specific flatness that comes from separating emotion from language through sheer repetition. Graham was a man who required control. Over the household, over the schedule, over the narrative. He had a way of making you understand, without ever directly saying so, that the cost of deviation was high, and the payment would be extracted quietly. Her mother had tried to leave twice. She came back both times. Faye, older, had eventually come to understand why. It was a specific kind of trap built over years. When Faye was 19, her mother fell down the stairs of their home in Barrie. She was found by Graham. The official ruling was accidental. There had been an RCMP inquiry, brief and quickly closed. Faye had been home that night. She had been in the kitchen. She had heard the argument. She had heard what came after. She had spent the 5 years since inside the Alcott house, Ostensibly completing her apprenticeship at a shop Graham owned a share of, ostensibly living a normal life, while understanding with total clarity that she was being managed, kept close, kept visible, kept from speaking. She had left 3 weeks ago with her toolbox, her certifications earned under her mother's maiden name, and nothing that could be tracked. "He's looking for me," she said, "because he knows I was in that kitchen." Cole's jaw was tight. He said nothing for a long moment. "Then you're not handling this alone anymore." She looked at him with an expression that wasn't quite suspicion and wasn't quite hope, but something caught between the two. The expression of a person who has heard that before, and who has learned that it usually meant one problem replacing another. "Why?" she asked. "Because you work here," he said, "and that means something in this building." The motorcycle had been in the corner of the shop for 6 years. It was a 1972 Triumph Bonneville T120, faded burgundy, in the kind of condition that said it had once been cared for, and then hadn't been ridden in a long time. A retired RCMP officer named Ed Curran had brought it in for storage, not repair, just safekeeping. He had told Cole only that it belonged to someone who couldn't claim it right then, and that it should be kept safe. Cole had kept it safe because Ed Curran was a man whose judgment he trusted, and because nobody had told him not to. On a slow Thursday afternoon in Faye's third week, Cole asked her if she wanted a project. She walked around the Bonneville twice. She crouched beside the engine, looked at the frame, ran her fingers along the top tube. Something moved in her face that she kept controlled. "It's a T120, she said. "Good year. The engine will be restorable. Frame looks sound." "Take the lead on it," Cole said. "Rudy will back you up, but it's yours if you want it." She looked at the bike for a long moment. "Then yeah, I'll take it." She found it on a Tuesday 3 days into the restoration. She had been working through the frame systematically, checking welds, measuring alignment, clearing the years of settled grime from every joint. Behind the headstock where the steering tube met the frame, there was a hollow section sealed at the factory with a rubber plug. The plug had been replaced. The replacement was newer than the rest of the bike, and whoever had installed it had done it carefully enough that it wouldn't be found unless someone was looking at exactly the right angle with exactly the right knowledge of where to look. Faye knew where to look. It was the kind of detail a mechanic found, not an owner. Inside the hollow space, wrapped in a small square of waterproof neoprene and sealed with electrical tape, was a USB drive. Taped to the outside of the wrap, folded twice into a tight square, was a piece of paper. She sat down on the floor of the garage. The handwriting on the paper was her mother's. She knew it immediately in the chest before her brain had finished processing a single word. The date at the top was 2 weeks before Diane Morin died. She read every word in the particular stillness of someone who has stopped breathing. The letter explained the USB drive. It explained what was on it. It explained that Diane had left the drive inside the Bonneville. A bike she had owned before Graham, one he had never known existed, and had arranged for Ed Curran, a man she had trusted since childhood, to take it somewhere safe. Curran had been the responding officer to a previous incident at the house. He had looked at Graham, Diane wrote, the way someone looks when they know and cannot say so yet. At the bottom of the letter, in her mother's careful hand, "I don't know how long this stays hidden. I don't know if you're the one who finds it. But if you're reading this and I'm not there, please understand that I tried. I tried to leave something that could matter." Faye sat on the floor of the garage for a long time. Then she stood up, folded the letter carefully, tucked it inside her jacket, and walked to Cole's office. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. "You need to hear something," she said, "and then we need to call someone." The USB drive contained 47 minutes of audio. Diane Morin had recorded it on her phone over the course of the final month of her life, fragments of conversation captured when she had learned to be ready. Graham's voice was clear on most of it, the specific language of a man who threatened without making threats, consequences framed as observations, control rendered audible in his own words, the whole architecture of the arrangement preserved in his own voice. The clearest recording was from 8 days before she died. He had discovered she was speaking to someone at the women's shelter in town. The recording lasted 11 minutes. By the end of it, there was no ambiguity about what Graham Alcott said to his wife in private. Sandra Kwan was a civil litigation lawyer out of Thunder Bay. Cole reached her through a chain of 2 people he trusted. She drove to Hartwell the following day, listened to the full 47 minutes, and then sat for a moment with her hands flat on the table. "Where has this been for 6 years?" she asked. "Inside a motorcycle," Cole said. Sandra looked at Faye. "Your mother put this there?" "Yes." Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then, "What you have here, the drive, the letter, combined with your own testimony about the night she died, that is not a small thing." A pause. "He's been telling people she fell." "For 5 years, Faye said. "I know, and we're going to make sure he has to stop." Ed Curran was retired and living in Sudbury. He answered Cole's call on the second ring and said, before Cole had finished explaining why he was calling, "I've been waiting for this. Tell me what you need." He had not forgotten Diane Morin. He had responded to the call at the house 3 months before her death, written a report suggesting the situation warranted further attention, and watched that report get quietly reassigned. He had pushed and been told, in the way that officers are sometimes told things, that the matter was resolved. He had met Diane once more after that privately at her request. She had given him a key. "I kept the bike," he said, "and I kept the secret, and I retired early because I couldn't stay in a department that ran the way that one ran." A pause. "I'll give a full statement. Everything I saw, everything she told me, the report that got buried. If there's a chance to do something with it now, yes, whatever you need." A woman named Phyllis Omond had lived 2 doors down from the Alcott house in Barry. She had heard the argument the night Diane died. She had called it in. She had given a statement. 3 months later, she had accepted a job transfer she hadn't applied for in Halifax, arranged through channels she hadn't understood at the time. Sandra Kwan's office reached her on a Friday morning. Phyllis listened. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I filed that report and nothing happened. I've thought about it almost every day since." She agreed to give a statement. She said she had written down what she heard that same night, while it was fresh, not trusting herself to remember clearly later, and that she still had the pages in a box in her spare bedroom. "Diane told me once that she had a daughter," Phyllis said near the end of the call. "That her daughter was going to be okay, whatever happened." She said it like she was trying to convince herself. A pause. "Is she okay?" Sandra looked across the room at Faye, who was sitting against the wall with her arms crossed and her face carefully composed. "Yes," Sandra said. "She's okay." Graham Alcott's people moved the way they always moved, quietly at first, the blue SUV outside the garage. A phone call to the Hartwell municipal office raising concerns about the Iron Shield MC's commercial license. Then an article in a regional outlet suggesting, in careful language, that a young woman with a history of mental health difficulties had recently come under the influence of a motorcycle club and was making unfounded allegations against a respected public official. Cole read the article on a Sunday morning. He put the paper down. Then he called Sandra. "I know," she said before he finished his first sentence. "He's seen the filing. It's a signal. He's trying to shape how people hear the story before the story is public." A pause. "He cannot stop the investigation. The audio recordings alone are enough to open a formal inquiry. Combined with Curran's statement and Oman's written account, what that article is trying to do is going to collapse the moment the investigation becomes public." When Cole told Faye, she was 3/4 of the way through rebuilding the Bonneville's engine. She wiped her hands on a rag, read the article, and handed it back. "He used those exact words when I was 17, she said. "Mental health difficulties. He said it to my school. He said it to my guidance counselor." She picked up her wrench. It didn't work then either in the end. Cole looked at her, this 24-year-old woman who had walked in out of a November rainstorm with a taped-up toolbox and more self-possession than most people twice her age. He thought about Diane Morin alone in a house in Barry, hiding a USB drive inside a motorcycle frame with enough care that it would last 6 years. "It's going to get louder before it gets quiet," he said. "I've had loud before," Faye said. "Loud I can handle." The formal investigation was assigned 6 weeks after Sandra's filing. Graham Alcott's lawyers requested meetings and found the appropriate channels less accommodating than they had historically been. 2 local business owners who had dealt with his office came forward with accounts of their own. A former aide gave an interview. Phyllis Oman's written pages, 11 years old, dated and signed, filed in a Halifax storage box, became the piece that made it, in Sandra's words, something the Attorney General's office could not reasonably decline to pursue. The day the formal charges were announced, Faye was finishing the Bonneville. Stitch knocked on the bay door and held up his phone without saying anything. She read the headline. She set the phone down on the workbench. She picked up her torque wrench. She finished the job. Lorne Samuels had stopped pretending he wasn't watching sometime in the 5th week. He watched openly now, the way you watch something you've decided to have an opinion about. His opinion, delivered to Cole without preamble. "She belongs here." That was the whole sentence. Cole had agreed without saying so because they both knew he didn't need to. The Bonneville ran the way it was supposed to run. Faye heard it in the engine before she saw it in the gauges, the specific balance of a machine restored correctly, every component speaking to every other the way they were designed to speak. She rolled it out of the bay on a Saturday morning in late January, -12, which in Hartwell was considered reasonable for a short ride if you dressed for it. Cole was in the doorway. Rudy stood behind him. Stitch was leaning against the bay frame with his arms crossed and his expression arranged into the deliberate blankness he used when he was trying not to look pleased. Faye sat on the Bonneville and looked at it for a moment. She thought about her mother in a storage locker, handing a key to a man. she trusted enough to give something irreplaceable to. She thought about what it meant to build something carefully enough that it survived beyond you. The bike had waited 6 years in the corner of a garage for someone patient enough to bring it back. Her mother's voice had waited the same way inside the same machine, for the right hands to find it. She had found both. She had arrived in Hartwell with a toolbox held together with electrical tape and a bruise she hadn't explained and nowhere to sleep. She had asked for work when she had nothing else to ask for, and the men in this garage had said yes. Not because they had to, not because anyone told them to, but because that was the kind of place this was. The kind of place her mother had known it was, years before Faye ever walked through its door. Some things get hidden because someone believes correctly that the right place will keep them safe long enough to matter. Her mother had been right about that. Faye put the Bonneville in gear and rode out into the cold Hartwell morning, and the engine ran exactly as it should.